We'll fuck all the dice, bring worlds to life. Masters of the dungeon cutting like a knife. Heroes, villains, lord, share. Learn the craft, magic in the air.
Welcome to Masters of the Dungeon, the podcast where game masters get deeply nerdy about tabletop RPGs. This week, my special guest is Brad from Diaden. Brad is a YouTuber and a very experienced dungeon master, and also 1/3 of the landlocked warlocks. That is a tongue twister.
Yeah, that name kills me. When we were brainstorming names for our joint effort, right, of our 3 YouTube channels coming together, I threw out like 30 different ideas. I was like just on a roll, just inspiration, pitching names, and I threw out Landlocked Warlocks as a joke, and that was the one that Ryan and Jim are both like, "That's the one." I'm like, "No, that's not the one. That was a joke." What about all the other cool names I suggested? Yeah. So we're the Landlocked Warlocks.
Yeah. At least it's a YouTube channel, not a kid. It's worse than the name of your kid in that. Yeah. So tell us a bit about the Diaden, your channel.
Yeah, so the Diaden is kind of a pet project I started almost 2 years ago now, and it focuses on mostly dungeon master advice, like, tips and tricks to be a better dungeon master. Sometimes we get into like the a little more like game craft theory, game theory design stuff, but a lot of times it's just like, what do you do in this situation? Here's a cool way to build towns, or here's a cool way to flesh out your NPCs. So a lot of the classic D&D themed advice, but I always try to make it like specific and actual. I think a lot of the advice online is pretty general, but I try to give a little more of a detailed, actionable way to go about doing things.
I think one of the things that your channel was very smart about is your videos only seem to be around the 15-minute mark, and I appreciate that as a dungeon master. Like, I'll look for something like, how do I run a skill challenge, or how do I build a village? And you'll click through YouTube and you'll find these videos and they're like 1 hour to 2 hours long. And I don't have enough time. I just need the gist of it. So, I do appreciate that sort of those small micro, like I can get what I need, get some information, what I need in a manageable time. So even though you've only done the YouTube for a couple of years, you've been a DM for like 40 odd years.
Yeah, so I started when I was 10 years old, and I just turned 52, so 42 years.
Same age, mate.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So we might have cut our teeth on the same system. So what was your first?
The first D&D that I actually purchased was the Mincer Red Box. Yep. Exactly.
I've still got mine behind me.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah. And to this day, I still say that is the best way to learn how to play, because it has that choose your own adventure style like tutorial. And I, like, at 10 years old, I was able to read this and like, okay, I get this game. Right. And so I don't know why, more recent editions haven't done, a newer version of that. Right. Because that's just the perfect way to teach somebody how to play.
Shadow Dark, I guess, sort of has a solo game. Well, they have a solo game mechanic, don't they?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But I know what you mean. The flip where you got to rescue the cleric. It's gonna bug me. The name of the wizard, Bargle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bargle, and I think Alina was the cleric. And that, as a 10-year-old boy, that was my first experience with the main character dying. Right. One of the good guys died. I was like, what? So that locked it into my memory.
Yeah, that classic Elmore art as well. And I think that came around the same time for me. I don't know about yourself, that I started reading fantasy novels. So I got the Red Box and Dragonlance Chronicles
Mm-hmm.
around that same time, and it just the combination of those two things just opened up my imagination and love. So, but it's not just D&D you played though, was it?
No, it's I mean, TSR was in its heyday. They were making all sorts of games back then, and we played, I think, just about everything TSR made. The Marvel superhero role playing game, the Top
The
Secret,
Yellow Box.
right?
Have you-
Yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
Star
Yep.
Frontiers.
I owned Star Frontiers, but I could never convince my friends to play it. So I never actually got to play Star Frontiers. But we played Top Secret. We played that one a lot. The spy game, and Gamma World. We dabbled in that one a little bit, and then we branched out to the games that weren't TSR, like Shadowrun. Of course, I played a little bit of Traveler because that was before all those other games that I just mentioned came out. Traveler was kind of the only other one out there that we knew of. It was like D&D and Traveler were like the two TTRPGs that we were aware of.
Mine was Paranoia.
Oh yeah, Paranoia. That was a fun one.
Yeah. That became an obsession for a couple of years before I got into. Did you get into advanced D&D?
We did, yeah. We moved from the box sets. But part of the problem with the box set is we all owned a different one because there were 3.
Yep.
We each owned a different one, and so that buying the hardbacks was a way to kind of all land on using the same system.
Yeah. I know my parents like moaned about how much it cost, because I wanted D&D off the back of watching E.T. That's the first time I saw it mentioned in a mainstream movie, and I wanted that for Christmas. And I know my parents were like, this, it was a little bit more pricey than what they expected, but I still, have my books. So it's obviously a gift that I looked after and I loved.
Oh yeah. I hate the fact that my stuff disappeared. I lost it in a move somewhere. It was all in a box, and then somehow that box disappeared when I was moving at some point.
But I had one box that I kept at my mum's that I wrapped in bubble wrap, and I taped up and I writ all over it. Do not ever throw out. And it was just all my favorite stuff from my childhood. So I kind of just put it into one box, and then my mum listened to me. So it's quite lucky there. But it's funny how those, I've still got my advanced Dungeons and Dragons books, and they haven't held up as well as the softback.
Interesting.
Softback books. Yeah, they've kind of fallen apart on me. So yeah. All right. So before we get into today's topic, I have a little section that I like to call Game Master Backstory, where I go through your ideals, your bond, and your flaws of being a game master. It hasn't held up well because it's now been retconned out of the 2024 edition, but I guess it's mine now. So
yeah.
So, what is your ideal? So, what is there a core philosophy that shapes how you approach being a game master?
I would say my ideal, I guess, is twofold. It's my ideal is collaborative storytelling. I guess that's my ideal. And then, but the way, this kind of point, 1A under that ideal is player choice. Those are kind of the two tenets of my, my gaming, is that this is a collaborative storytelling process, and the way that it is collaborative is I always have to be mindful of giving players choices, giving them agency.
Yeah.
So I would say that was my core ideal.
Yeah, it's not a one player game.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what makes Dungeons and Dragons different, and it is, your best games are going to be when everyone buys in and contributes to the game or your world. So
I would say that was one of the advantages of starting playing as young as we did, because we were like 10, 11, 12 years old playing this game, and we did everything wrong. Like, we made all the mistakes. Um, but that was a huge like learning experience, because I've made all the mistakes. I've been the railroad DM. I've been the player who got mad because I was being railroaded. We did the DM player characters and all the stuff that everybody tells you not to do. We did all that because there was no internet giving us advice. So we learned the hard way on everything.
Yeah. Yeah. That's sometimes the best way to learn. Okay. Your bond. Is there part of being a DM that you feel especially connected or passionate about?
I think the thing that I'm most passionate about is the friendships that tabletop RPGs create. There's definitely, like, I would say, like, of the guys I grew up with, I stayed in touch with a lot of them for many years after we graduated and went to college and moved on. But it's the ones that I played games with that I still stay in touch with to this day. That there's a bond that's formed when you play TTRPGs together. That's I don't think it's the closest thing I've come to that kind of bond is coaching sports.
Okay.
Like I coached high school basketball for a little while, and the guys that were on that basketball team, I have a special relationship with those guys that when we get together, we still talk about the like funny stories from those seasons.
Yeah.
And that's the closest thing that comes to those people that you've gamed with for a long time. You just have like a unique relationship with people that you game with.
Yeah. Do you think it's because it's a game of your imagination where you're encouraged to be silly and you let your guard down and you're not putting on you're kind of being a little bit vulnerable?
I would definitely say that's true. Yeah, that in order to role play, you have to be vulnerable. And my wife's a theater kid, and I think it's the same way with her like high school theater friends. Like, they have a special bond as well, and I think it's probably the same thing. Is that vulnerability that you have to open yourself up to be able to put yourself out there and play a character who's not you, and put on a silly voice, or get up on stage in the case of theater and act things out. There's a vulnerability to that, and I think that's what builds that connection.
Yeah. Okay. Your flaw. What's one part of your DM style that you're currently trying to improve or refine?
Well, for the longest time, it was initiative. I was terrible at keeping track of initiative, and I finally decided that initiative just sucks.
Yeah.
So I had to find a better way of doing initiative because I just was not good at it. But I think beyond that, the other thing that I really want to be better at is bringing more role play into the combat. Remembering that when you switch to the combat part of the game, that yes, you want to have that tactical mindset so that you're giving the players a good challenge, but you don't want to stop role playing during combat. That you want the bad guys making quips to the players, dropping hints as to what their overall plan is, right?
Yeah.
You can still role play during combat, and when you do, it just makes the combat more fun.
Yeah, that leads quite well into the immersion. But I hear what you say, because we're doing a lot of work when we're game mastering combat, because there's a lot of math going on. So you can just get lost in the math, especially if you're got several different types of monster statistics in front of you, and those monsters have got complicated, like they've got spells or they've got lair actions, and you're trying to deal with the minutiae of math, and that role playing element just takes a backseat because you've only got so much of a brain. So, and I think you need to. I rush it because I hear what you're saying there. I have this problem as well. And yeah, and it's just remembering, like, when they have those comical dice rolls, give them a consequence, or they have those epic dice rolls, give them a consequence in the form of role playing. You know?
Yeah, yeah, and I think you're right, because it, like, the math uses a different part of the brain than the role playing side does. So you kind of switch into that more analytical, mathematical, tactical side of your brain. Um, but yeah, one thing I've found that has helped me remember to role play during combat is, like, doing a quick rewind. So whenever
Yeah.
I get to a player who's, it's their turn and they pause because they're not exactly sure what to do next, I'll re-describe what just happened.
Mm.
So the wizard just cast magic missile, and the rogue snuck around behind the creature, and the barbarian just got smacked in the face. Now what are you going to do, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that gets me back into my descriptive side of my head, and then I can be like, then the bad guy, says this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You can kind of almost set it up like a. Yeah, I hear what you say. Like, you just re-describe, because it's only what, 6 seconds.
Right. Yeah.
So you can just kind of just recap those 6 seconds. Okay, so yeah, the rogue pulled out his rapier. He rolled a 1. He somehow, like, completely, like, threw his and he pulled it out in such a hurry. He's thrown that across the room. That's now on the other side of the room. Yeah, and yeah, you like you say, you just break it down, and then that kind of encourages them to think in that way as well. Yeah,
Yeah, because you kind of paint that word picture to help them make the decision. I was like, am I going to cast a spell? Am I going to, move? Am I going to heal? What am I going to do?
Mm. I need to not be so overwhelmed by the math. I have tried so many different ways to deal with that. So the one that always throws me out is spells. Because I never, when I'm a player, I never play wizards, and I never play spellcasters. I'm always a martial. I like martial classes. So yeah, when I try and print all the spells out in advance and go, okay, that's what that does, and I've got a little bit of flavor text and stuff like that. But then I've just created a ton of paperwork behind my screen, and then even that sometimes, like, I'm doing it to be, to make it easier for myself, and then when I look at it, I'm like, oh my god, what bit of paper did I write that on? And so I need to be more. I still now trip over that, because I'm always nothing. I think takes players out of the immersion of, like, I don't know what spell save you need to make. I can't remember if that's attack or you need to make a save, and you're having to read the spell description out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that, and that throws me out of that role playing element that you're talking about quite a bit. No, I feel I need to get better at that side, or I need to manage that side so I can focus on that other side. I need to somehow, and I'm not sure if I'm overcomplicating that side of the game in my brain, and maybe I just need to not care as much about that and just wing it.
I like the way the new monster design has the spell casting built into the monster's actions. So that way, their primary spells that they're going to be using, and they're already in the section that you're used to looking at in the monster manual.
Yeah.
I like that design, and I've tried to copy that when I make my own NPCs. Like, I'll pull one of the NPC stat blocks out of the back of the old monster manual and figure out, okay, what are the spells, kind of like you were saying, like, what are the spells I'm going to use most, that I pull those up and have them, either in a separate window or on a little, note, handwritten note in front of me.
Yeah, and then there's also an element of, you want it to be challenging, but you also don't want a TPK straight away sometimes. And you're like, well, if I had this spell list and I was a player, then I'm just going to go, yeah, first thing, if they're all grouped together in a doorway, I'm going to cast fireball straight away.
Right.
But that's sometimes that's not fun. You don't want players rolling death saving throws in round 1.
Right. Well, yeah, and you want it to be interesting. Like, I think the Oni, the monster, the Oni, can cast a cone of cold, I think 2 or maybe even 3 times. So, I mean, if you're running an Oni, you can just spam cone of cold. That's like mathematically the most
Yeah.
effective thing to do, but that's kind of boring as a storyteller, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the player that constantly uses Eldritch Blast every round. We've all come across that warlock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have that player who's always using Eldritch Blast, but he offsets it by, because excuse me, because he's only using Eldritch Blast in combat pretty much. He uses all his spell slots for utility spells.
Yeah.
So outside of combat, he's always doing like the most crazy creative stuff. And that makes up for his like Eldritch Blast, Eldritch Blast, Eldritch Blast.
Okay, let's get into the topic. So today I thought we would discuss the role of atmosphere and immersion in tabletop RPGs. So what does immersion mean to you in the context of a tabletop role-playing game, and why is it important?
I think immersion to me is that sense of verisimilitude, right? That this world is, while it's fantastic and sometimes ridiculous, there's a certain believability to it. And like when I'm a player and a good DM is creating that believability, it really helps me stay in character and stay in the role, right? Stay in the world. So that I'm thinking of solutions in terms of being
Yeah.
in the world, versus you know, just what's best mechanically, right? If that makes sense. That when you're
Yeah.
creating that sense of immersion, there really is the good version of what would my character do, because I'm believing in this world and I'm thinking in terms of how would I interact in this room or in this wooded area. What would my character really think of doing if I'm believing and I'm immersed in this encounter in this town, versus using your character sheet like a control panel, right?
Mm. It is a role-playing game, and I think that's the element that sometimes gets the most forgotten amongst a lot of players. They like they say, they treat it like a video game of such, where the character sheet, the power game, a lot of power gamers especially, they're building it to beat the game, and they forget about the role-playing side of it. And Dungeons and Dragons is the world's greatest role-playing game. Well, they've been telling us that for years. So it's not the world's greatest combat simulator. So
Right.
maybe it should be. But yeah.
But yeah, so when I think of immersion, I think that's I want my players to have that moment. Even if it's just one moment a session where they really feel something about the world, right?
Mm.
Or about the bad guy. They have that visceral response where I'm genuinely angry at this villain, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm shocked by this plot twist, or I have real compassion for these NPCs. Like when you have that like real emotion that comes to the surface, in response to this pretend world, right? It's really cool.
It's so satisfying when you do have an NPC that you find there's a trigger, and and your players just hate him. I had that last night with the Flame Skull. So my Flame Skull is just constantly threatening to kill everyone's mothers. they just keep going, I hate this guy so much, I want to kill him. And because he has regeneration, I just had this thing where he just, if they look like they're going to kill him, he's getting low, he decides to cast Fireball, blow himself up, taking everyone else with him, because he knows he'll be back in an hour, because they don't have any holy water. So I had to deal with him like 3 times now, and he's just floating around the dungeon, just threatening to kill everyone's mothers, and then sort of just like basically like a suicide bomber. So they hate him, and I just had him showing up at like every time they had a good plan to get to a certain part of the dungeon, this annoying little floaty skull would come up and just start messing with him. And not this guy.
I had that experience just last night. We were the game I was running. One of my players' characters just mindlessly murdered an NPC in an alleyway, just because he needed a disguise and he wanted this guy's clothes. So to intimidate one guy, he just used his dragonborn dragon breath to incinerate the other guy. So I wanted to come up with a creative way to kind of bring that back up, right? So I introduced this NPC who turned out to be the sister of the guy that was incinerated, and she had this whole convoluted kind of backstory. But essentially, what happened was after her brother died, she got very serious about her life and became extremely successful. So it was a way to like create a villain from the player's actions, but not like directly. So instead of just her wanting revenge, she doesn't even know who killed her brother.
So I was thinking you were going to say she was going to hire the players to track down the murder of her brother.
But no, so she doesn't even know who killed her brother. But the fact that her brother died just completely changed her life, and now she's like this very successful businesswoman with all this money, and she's just like a bitch to the players.
Yeah,
and my player had this really angry reaction to this NPC because she was being so condescending and rude in this scene. But he also knew that he created this woman, right?
Yeah.
And it's and he was just like I could see on his face like he's genuinely angry.
Yeah, it is good when you get those reactions. Well, you got to read the room as well. Like, are they having fun? If they're not having fun and you've triggered something, maybe not.
Yeah, I had to like think to myself. I'm like, maybe I leaned a little too hard on that because he seemed almost too angry.
Yeah.
So I'll double check before next session to make sure that I didn't spoil his fun.
Yeah, you might be working something out that you don't know. Okay. What are your go-to resources or tools for building an immersive environment in your game?
So I largely lean on making maps, but it's not so much like it's helpful to hand the player a map and give them kind of a sense of the region that they're in, right? But over the years, what I've realized is the actual making of the map is very useful for me, because when I'm putting stuff on the map, I'm like figuring out, why would a town be here? What resources would these people be drawing from? Well, this town is near a mountain, so maybe it's a mining town, or this town is near the river, so they're going to be a fishing community. This town's just in the middle of nowhere, so maybe there's something magical in this middle of nowhere spot that makes this town worth having here. And I use Incarnate, so as far as a specific tool, I use Incarnate to make my maps. But I find that, like I said, while the map is cool, it's actually the process that I go through while I'm making my map that helps me flesh out the world. And then that ends up translating to the table, because I know why this town is here and what the economy is kind of like and what their resources are like. So when the players are in the marketplace, I can be like, oh, well, they sell berries here because, they're in a higher elevation, kind of cold area. So like blackberries and blueberries grow wildly here, and, something like that, right? How the ecology informs the economy, and that informs the background of my NPCs. I kind of figure all that out while I'm making my map.
Props are great to hand out to your players. I should do more of that. It is a time consuming thing, but it is it is nice. Like, you open a tomb, it's got a map folded into it, and then you hand the players a map or a journal entry. But it depends on your group. There's only one player that sometimes will gravitate towards reading a journal entry. You have to be kind of get to what you're trying to, I guess, breadcrumbs you're trying to sprinkle there. You don't want to make it too wordy that can't be bothered reading this. So at the same time, you don't want to make it so on the nose that it's like, go here, there's a magic sword. So
right, yeah.
It's a fine line. I find tools like ChatGPT are really useful for that. Like, I want to write a journal entry or to describe a map, describe a location of a magic item, and they'll give you, you can kind of just keep pumping away at ChatGPT till it gets what you're after.
That's a good idea. I might have to try that, because I end up oftentimes being too vague when I do a journal entry kind of thing, or like a letter from one NPC to the other, and the players find the letter. A lot of times they read it and they don't get what I'm trying to say, because I'm trying not to be too on the nose. So then I have to make an intelligence check, and then I explain what I forgot.
So I used to, there is like you say, it's around a dice roll, isn't it? So I used to put it in everything into a journal entry and make it all the font and everything, and then hand it to the player and let them read it and pass it around. But like you say, it was vague, and a lot of the times what I was trying to give them just got totally missed. And I was like, I just spent 2 hours on that. It's really frustrating. So now I've gone back and I've gone, just roll an investigation check. What did you get? Okay. You skim read it and you get these bullet points. 40 miles east of where you are, there is a tomb. Apparently in this tomb, there is a magical sword known as this. And that's all they need to know. And then they remember it. So, yeah. But I don't know if that's being immersive, it's probably not.
Well,
so
I like, as we're talking here, I have found that like the journal entry thing and the letters are sometimes not the best way, but other things that can be super simple is a wanted poster. And that's one I've used before, where you find a decent art, some decent art of the villain, and then you color adjust it so it, like, you make it all like sepia tones, and then you print it out, and it looks like kind of old weathered poster, right? And then for a couple of sessions in a row, there's this wanted poster that's laying on the table, and every time I throw it back out there just as a reminder, and not like hand it to anybody, but I put it out before people arrive, so they walk in, there's the wanted poster, right? That can be an easy way to be a very direct, here's a bad guy you should go get.
A MacGuffin is good as well. Like, you can sometimes get some cool things off places like Temu, and just like a physical, like a puzzle box or a physical thing, the players at the time, it doesn't even have to mean something. Like, you find this device and the baddies are after this device, and you just leave it on your table and the players are picking it up and playing with it. I find stuff like that really cool. I played with a much younger group, so they'd never seen the film Hellraiser, so I had the Hellraiser puzzle box as a MacGuffin for a while. And that was cool, because I was like, they found it, the bad guys were after it, it's got to mean something, and I could see while I was DMing it would get passed around almost like a fidget spinner, they're all
right, yeah,
playing
that's cool.
with it. So, I hear what you're saying about the maps as well. I find maps really great for helping with prep, especially when I'm running big dungeons. Mm-hmm. So I'll get my head around a bigger dungeon a lot better with like using a map and putting where all the monsters are, rather than actually flipping through the book and reading.
Right.
So it makes, and then when you do it, I also get the ecology of how the dungeon works.
Right.
Which makes it slightly more dynamic in my head. Okay, there is a reason why all these this particular sort of faction of monsters are over this side of the dungeon, and it's because something really bad is over this side of the dungeon. And there's oozes, then I guess as they approach this area, it would be unnaturally clean. So then it gives me an element of I probably should describe that this side of the dungeon is particularly dirty, and all of a sudden when you've got to this side, somehow it's like someone's been here and it's cleaned it, like all the walls are, so, and that comes from not reading the book, because I'll forget when because I always, you have to have the map there, and then you have to read each keyed location, and you kind of lose where the keyed location is as you flip through the book, especially if you're reading it digitally.
Right.
Whereas if I physically got the map and I'm putting tokens on it, then I'm kind of, do you know what I'm trying to say? It's it just helps me prepare it a lot easier in my mind to run it.
Yeah, I've experienced that, like laying it out. Like I use a lot of like 3D terrain and dungeon tiles and stuff like that. And when I have time to lay out the dungeon, ahead of time, and I lay it out with my my 2D tiles, and I put my little 3D terrain on top of it. Oh, there's columns here, and I'm kind of limited by the type of tiles that I have. So I never exactly replicate the dungeon from the book, but I try to capture the ideas, right, and the themes and the layout. It might not be exactly, but I get the general spirit of what the designer put into their book. But when in that process of laying it out like that ahead of time, I have experienced what you just said, where you kind of figure stuff out, and you kind of learn about the dungeon, and you might even like add some things or change some things, because it actually really makes more sense from like the dungeon ecology for this to be here and that to be there. And I find that really helpful. And I guess that's the other thing, like you talk about resources for immersion. I think one of the things that I really lean on to have a more immersive experience is using the tabletop terrain, right? The handcrafted, hills and mountains, and the trees and all that stuff. Putting that on the table, I think that like helps you paint the scene.
I used to be quite into doing miniatures and trying to do that stuff. I've given up on that since D&D Maps has come up on Beyond. So, and I was running at the time when that came out, I was running Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which is just a massive dungeon, and you have no idea where your players are going to go. And I didn't want to start. I think there's something unimmersive about having to draw on a Chessex map,
right?
As you're going and stuff like that. And that came out at the same time, and it was really great. So, and it was so simple. And now I've just used it all the time because I Chromecast it on my TV.
Nice.
So we just have the dungeon map, and with the fog of war. And since I've gone that way, I haven't used my map or miniatures since. And we just basically do, because when I don't like, see, that's another thing I think takes away from immersion is distraction, and Beyond has caused that distraction by forcing everyone to have their character sheets on their phone. And so I'm at the same time, as much as I like having players use, I quite like them having Beyond, because it saves, especially with newer players, it saves me having to do another job of help them level up or create characters or whatever. It's so much easier. It is a distraction, them having their character sheets on their phone, but I've gotten used to that now. So
it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Like it makes some things easier, but then it increases the distractibility, because all they have to do is like tap a button and now they're playing Candy Crush, right?
Yeah,
but
more with younger players. It depends how invested they are in their game. So when I set up my other group, I was like, no, we're not using Beyond. We're using traditional pen and paper, and we're rolling characters. And they'd never played Dungeons and Dragons before. That was a nightmare. And it was like halfway through our session 0, I was like, I've changed my mind. We're all going on Beyond, because I can't sit here and like teach 5 people how to create a character from scratch. Because I was like, just take the pre-generated characters, and they're like, no, I want to create my own character. It's part of the experience. And I was like, okay, fair enough. But yeah, I went straight back to Beyond. I was like, this is too hard. I've already got to remember I've got to remember this game I'm running.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why I love a game like Shadow Dark, is because it's simple and streamlined enough that you can go old school, do it all on paper, right? You don't have to do anything digitally. I just recently ran a game of Shadow Dark for my family. They were all in town for like an early Christmas celebration. So my brother-in-law and then his girlfriend, and then my three oldest kids, and we had a great game playing Shadow Dark, and nobody was on their phone. It was fantastic.
Nice. I haven't played Shadow Dark yet. It looks very much like Back Me, but with sort of without the THAC0 element, with the
Right.
D20 system built into Back Me. So it does sound like it could be up my alley.
Yeah, it definitely reminds me of playing Back Me like I did when I was a kid, and but it has all the sensibility of 5th edition because it's built on the 5th edition game design engine, right? But it's just they just strip everything out to like the most simple aspects of the game, and it's really fun.
Nice. What about, do you use stuff like cosplay or music or lighting or anything like that?
I haven't, not consistently. Like every once in a while, I'll break something out like that. Like I'll have an NPC with an eye patch or something, or an NPC wizard with the funny hat. I've done that like sporadically, and I've tried music, and I'm not good at it. It's one of those things that I always want to do, and I just got a new laptop recently, so I've been toying around with music again. When I went to Green Dragon Fest, which is like this kind of small limited. I wouldn't even call it a con. It was like a almost felt like a private event because there's only like 50 people there. But there was a bunch of game designers and YouTubers that were running games, and I played a game with Hank from Runehammer.
Oh, nice.
And he was using music in his game, and he said he creates specific playlists that are right at 3 hours long because he always plays 3-hour sessions. So he creates 3-hour long playlists, and then he'll use those playlists through his game. I thought that was a really neat idea.
I know they have apps like, is it Sirenscape? Is that the name of the app? I've never used that. And I think all the official Dungeons and Dragons modules have playlists on Sirenscape.
Okay.
It's all kind of like microtransactions, and it's just another thing where you got to buy money, and I know because I was running Dragon Heist, and I know that they had Chris Perkins went in and recorded some stuff for Sirenscape, like noises for Xanathar. So you could like, but that's just another thing you have to press. That's another button you have to press. And all of a sudden to me, you feel like you're becoming more of a DJ than a than a DM.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things where you kind of have to find a sweet spot, right? Because it can become a distraction. Like you're using it for immersion. I think that's true of anything. Like you're using it for immersion, but then if you get too caught up in it, then it can become a distraction. And the same is true with using like miniatures and terrain like I do. I've done it for quite some time, so I kind of have a system of how I can like throw a scene together pretty quickly, and at least I don't feel like I'm slowing the game down or distracting from the game while I'm setting up a scene. But I've definitely played with DMs who are like, all right, roll initiative, and then pause. Let me get all the miniatures out, where so that's something that can be used for immersion, but if it's not used well, it can be a distraction, right?
Yeah. There is a good amount, like I do like having one big ass miniature for a certain, like if you're hitting, like, so if you're running something like Tyranny of Dragons and you have a Tiamat miniature, there is that moment where you're like, you don't even have to roll it as combat, but when you pull out that big ass mini and you plonk it on your table, that's that's DM gold. That
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that when I have a new miniature that my players haven't seen yet. Recently I got a new black dragon, like a huge black dragon. And so I was very excited for the first time I got to drop that on the table. And then on Black Friday, I got a new Hydra miniature that I'm looking forward to painting up, so I can do that again with a giant Hydra.
So something I do, because I don't have miniatures, is I have a little light above my DM screen with a clip, and I print the monsters. I'll describe the monster, and then I'll pull the bit of paper out, and I'll clip the illustration of the monster onto the front of my DM screen.
That's a cool way to do it.
It's kind of like a low budget way of doing it. So, because we've got the maps up on the TV, and obviously the one thing I have to say about D&D Beyond maps is the tokens suck. They're cropped really weird. They've just taken the character out. No one's put any love or crop, anything. They've just basically chucked a circle somewhere on the center of the illustration. And so for example, if you throw a dragon out there, all you're getting is the picture of a female drow's face. You're not seeing the spider body or anything. Yeah. So having that illustration just cements it. So yeah, and I think that's a low budget. I mean, that to me, I don't need another side hobby of my hobby that's going to cost me more money.
Right.
So yeah.
I like that idea. I might steal that because I run games at a school for kids, and I'm not going to drag all my miniatures and terrain to the school, so I kind of run like kind of a bare bones style game there. But I might steal that idea to have the little 3D, or have the printouts of the monsters. I like that idea. Yeah,
the way I do it is I'll describe the room, I'll describe the monster, and then I'll put the little thing, and I just click it on the front of my DM screen, so they're all looking at it, and then we'll go into combat, or we'll go into role playing, depending on how they react. But it works really well, and it's cheap, and also I have a work computer that I can just abuse the printer, so, so it's not an issue. So, all right, let's get into the next question. So, I'm not sure. Do you play much virtual tabletop, or are you pretty much a?
I don't do much virtual. I played some virtually during the pandemic. That was probably the most I played virtually. So I don't do a lot of virtual stuff.
No, I use virtual tools, but I play in person. So
right.
Yeah.
I'm curious. You said you project maps on your TV. Is your TV flat on the table, or is it up on a wall?
I've chucked it up there with the blanket over it, so It's on the wall. I have thought about building one of those. I've seen them, and I was looking in the Black Friday sales for a cheap sort of Android. So Android TVs work really well with maps if you've got a laptop.
Okay.
Because you can just screencast to an Android TV straight away. It picks it up as a wireless display. Yeah, so they work really well. So I have the map on my computer, and then I just click it onto spectator view, and then chuck it up on the TV. So everyone kind of has to turn around and prop their necks. But I was thinking about just getting a small TV that would maybe a 24-inch that would fit in front of my DM screen, or maybe I'll build one and lie it flat. It's kind of that's a project that's in the back of my mind that I have been thinking about. Because it's only sort of come from the fact that I've started to use maps more and more often over the last. Well, how long's it been out? It's been out a year now.
I think so.
I jumped on when it first got announced because I have a whatever their tier is, their master tier subscription.
Gotcha.
So and it was kind of, I had a phobia of running mega dungeons, and I ran Dragon Heist with no intention of running Dungeon of the Mad Mage, but that adventure starts in the yawning portal. It puts an entrance to a dungeon, and my players are like, "What's down there? What's down there?" all the time. And one of the things about immersion is you can't put a carrot there and not expect your players to go towards it. So
Right.
so it kind of stemmed from that, and I was like, okay, I'll let them go down and have a wander, even though they're under level, whatever. I'll only prep the first level of the dungeon. I hate mega dungeons. I don't want to run a 20 level mega dungeon. Yeah. Next thing, we're like 6 levels into this thing, and I'm like, oh, guess we're running this adventure now. Yeah. So how do you manage immersion online compared to in person?
When I am playing online, I rely on my old DM skills back when I used to run everything theater of the mind. Because when I was when we were kids and then high school and college, we couldn't afford miniatures or any of that stuff, so we always played theater of the mind. So I have that skill set still, and so when I do run online, I run very very minimally. I like I've just played over Zoom before, like not even using a VTT, and just running completely theater of the mind over Zoom. I've tinkered around with Owlbear Rodeo, and I want to play with maps because I don't want to do the more complex stuff.
Maps. I hate VTTs. I don't. I've tried to use, like yourself, Owlbear Rodeo and the other ones, and I find them too complicated. Oh, we're old. I can recommend maps. It's very bare bones, extremely bare bones, but that's all I need. If I can just put a map up and I can do Shadow of War and I can move some tokens around, I can manage the rest. I don't need all the other bells and whistles.
We've been doing one shots. Ryan and Jim and myself, and that's on our Landlocked Warlocks channel. And those one shots, we're running completely theater of the mind. We're playing over StreamYard, which is the software we used for our podcast. And so with those, we're just completely theater of the mind. And those are good muscles to exercise, like just using description and kind of getting back. Because again, that's kind of an old school way to play. Because way back when, we didn't have all these software tools, and we didn't have, even though there were miniatures back then, they were hard to find, and there weren't enough of them. And like I said, we couldn't afford them anyway.
They're also poisonous. They were made from lead.
Yeah. That's true. It's surprising we survived our childhood. So many things were poisonous that we didn't realize were poisonous.
How do you use NPCs to enhance atmosphere and draw your players deeper into the story?
I love role-playing NPCs. That's probably my favorite part of dungeon mastering. And going back to like the when I build my region for my campaign, and I'm thinking about the ecology and the economy, and once I have those things kind of established, then I think, well, what would it be like to live here? So I try to, just like I would role play my character if I was a player in a game, I try to put myself in the headspace of these NPCs. So that's probably where most of my prep goes. Like there's probably like an hour right before the session where I'm actually looking at the adventure I'm running, or I'm going over my notes if it's completely homebrew stuff I'm running. But I probably spend most of my prep time like throughout the week, when you're in the car by yourself or you're in the shower or whatever, I'm thinking about my NPCs, and I'm kind of getting into the head of my NPCs so that when I role play them, they're not just there's an arrow over my head, you need to talk to me, here's the information I need to deliver. I try to think about what their motivations are and who they are as a person and why they're interacting with my player characters. to try to make those NPCs as lifelike as I can.
Yeah, they shouldn't just be a dice roll. Depends whether you get exposition or you don't get exposition.
Right. Yeah.
Which is, giving them a little quirk, I think, I find.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do voices, and I don't think you need to. I think people like Matt Mercer have raised the bar on given sort of some dungeon masters unrealistic expectations of how to approach the NPC
Mm-hmm.
thing. Like we're not voice actors. We're not. I try. I don't do. I can do certain voices. For some reason, all my orcs are always Eastern European. I don't know why I generate towards that. Years of doing bad Arnold Schwarzenegger impersonations have paid off there. But I find giving them quirks, just a lisp or just a limp or just giving them something that just stands out as well can make them immersive.
Yeah, I agree. Like sometimes just like the posture. Like if I'm playing an old man, I'll like lean over and like slouch my shoulders, right? Or if I'm, role playing a paladin, I'm going to sit up straight and puff out my chest when and I'm not always trying to do a voice, but sometimes changing that posture does change your voice, right? You're projecting more, you're projecting less, depending on. And sometimes it actually, like if I'm playing the old man and I'm hunched over and now I'm like falling into a voice right now because, my body is slouching and I'm, kind of channeling this character. So you can do a lot of different things, and you don't have to rely on voices. Your position, your body, or quirks. The character who always strokes his beard, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of get into that character, and you can go back and forth between characters by just having, a quirk. Like this character always starts off stroking his beard and saying, "Well," right?
Yeah.
And now I'm in that character. That's a little cue to the players and to myself that when I stroke my beard and say, "Well," now I'm this character, right? And that's not really difficult to pull off, right?
No, it's not. But I do understand you can get panicky with NPCs especially if an NPC has got important exposition or information that you really want your party to have to move your game in the direction that you feel you want it to go. And they're just not interested in talking to them, or they're just like, okay, you're boring, I'm moving on. You're like, oh no. and you're like, I fall into this trap still, and it frustrates me because I feel like there must be a better way. Like, and I'll go, oh, roll a insight check or roll a perception check, and they're like, oh, I got a 13. Oh, that's good enough for me. You feel like this guy's withholding some information. Maybe you should talk to him a little bit more. And I don't know. It annoys me because I don't feel that's a great way to approach that. And I should possibly think of another way. Maybe that NPC doesn't have that particular information, but another NPC could. So maybe I should just,
right,
shift it. I don't know if you do that.
I definitely have. Like when I forget to include an important piece of information in a scene, or my players just like they never go to the tavern, right? And now I'm like, well, I have this important information. How else can I get it to them? Probably the best example of that was I was doing Ghost of Saltmarsh, and like I said, I like maps, so I showed the player the map of Saltmarsh from the book, and that was a mistake because when they figured out they needed to go from the town to the manor house, right, the haunted manor, they remembered the map, and they're like, let me see the map again. Yeah, it's much quicker if we just go as the crow flies through the fields instead of up and around the road. And that like bypassed a whole bunch of the NPCs that I was planning on using to kind of flesh out the setting. So I had to make up NPCs in the farms along the way. And so, but I had my bullet points of important information that I needed to deliver. And so I just had those, farm boys that I made up
Yeah.
delivering the same information, but just in a different tone and a different way. So they got all the facts that they needed to set up the rest of the adventure, but they got it from the farm boys working the fields instead of,
Yeah.
the main NPCs in town.
Yeah. Just moving the DM's moving castle is what I like to call that. Where you're moving your plot point just to a different. Yeah. It makes your life a lot easier when you start thinking like that.
Yeah, well, and one of the things I was going to say is one of the arguments you see online is the quantum ogre, right? Are you familiar with that argument?
Yeah.
It's supposedly somebody online decided it's really unfair for the DM to just put the ogre encounter wherever he wants the ogre encounter, right? And I get that. I actually, in my head, for my own verisimilitude, I will avoid doing the quantum ogre thing. But I think it's completely okay to do it with information. Information is not limited. If you have an NPC, that NPC can't be two places at once. But the knowledge that NPC has can certainly be in two places at once because somebody else can know the same stuff.
Yeah.
And so, you might have, an important piece of information you want to get in front of the players, and they don't go towards that NPC, but that same information can belong to another NPC or be in a letter or, something else somewhere in the world.
Yeah. And yeah, you can just move that information to where it needs to be, that it still gets to your players. That's a better way than how I've done it in the past, where I'm like, hey, before you leave, make a dice roll. Yeah, because that does feel really forced. Okay.
Yeah.
What are some common pitfalls that dungeon masters face when trying to build atmosphere?
I think one of the things I mentioned before that I really like is getting that emotional response from the players. But don't put too much pressure on yourself to get a specific response at a specific time, because that's probably not going to happen, right? So if you're trying really hard to make the players afraid in this particular scene, and they're goofing off and they're not really paying attention, they're bringing some role play element from the previous scene into this one, so they're not getting it. They're not buying your atmosphere in that moment. You try to change the scene from here to there, and they're not there yet, right? You can get really frustrated or really disappointed that they didn't get scared when you wanted them to get scared, or they didn't get, they weren't moved to sympathy or empathy when you wanted them to feel for this NPC. Don't expect or try to predetermine what kind of emotional response you're going to get, because that will set you up for failure. And I think that's a mistake that folks often make, and then they're very disappointed by. So I would say just trust yourself to see the emotional response and then double down on it when it's there, whatever that response is.
No one knows your table like you're going to know your table once you've been playing with these people for a certain, because D&D isn't a half an hour game. It's a long commitment. So you do get to know these players, and read the room is how I would say that.
Right.
And I've been there as well. Where I know I'm about to reveal some dramatic revolution to my game that's going to be a big twist and change everything. But all my players are laughing about a dick joke that they made 5 minutes ago.
Right.
So you're sort of sitting there going, yeah, and I've made that mistake of trying to deliver that, and it didn't go down the way I wanted it, and like you say, we think about these games outside of the game as game masters, and we're like, oh, I can't wait till this is just gonna this is going to mess with the players, and this is just going to change everything. And it is really disappointing when that doesn't hit for you, and you start to like get frustrated at your players, going, "Oh, come on, guys! I wish you'd take this game as seriously as me." But it is a case of reading the room,
Right.
and and a lot of time you can't be mad at your players if they're laughing and having a good time.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's ultimately what you want. That's one of our. That goes back to our ideals of being a game master. So, so it's all pacing and timing. So, yeah, knowing when to pull the trigger is probably
Yeah, I
common
would say that's
pitfall.
a helpful tip. Is like you said, learn how to read the room, and that way you're not trying to set them up for a specific emotion. You just are
Mm,
waiting until they have that emotional response, and then you run with it. Like you
mm,
double down on it when you see it happen versus trying to make it happen.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and that's probably something more from dungeon masters that are running published adventures,
hmm.
because a published adventure gives you a specific timeline of this. When they enter this room, this is going to happen. So that's probably the pitfall. They're like, I have to do this because the book's telling me I have to do this. No, you don't. It's your game, mate. Yeah, just ignore the book. Yeah, you'll be all
Yeah,
right.
one of the best pieces of advice I can give is like what's in the book is not canon, right?
Mm,
The only thing that's canon is what has already happened at your table, right? So if the book says to do it this way and that's not how the players are doing it and that's not how you're feeling it, change it. It doesn't have to end up like the book says. If there's a more obvious answer that's unfolding because of the way you're role playing your NPCs and because the way your players are scheming or hatching plans, don't feel like you have to make it fit back into the book. Just roll with where the table is taking you, right? Because again,
mm.
this is a collaborative process.
Yeah. Okay, last question. What is one piece of advice you'd give to dungeon masters who want to make more immersive games?
Well, I would say, lean on your strength, I think is probably what is the best piece of advice I can give. So we've talked about like, using music, right? Or using cosplay. We talked about, creative descriptions and using theater of the mind. We talked about virtual tools. There's all sorts of things that we've been talking about. And I would say think about all those things and which one is the one that's easiest for you to do and which one is the easiest one for you to get better at.
Mm,
Start there and really double down on your effort to really get even better at the thing you're already good at. And
yeah,
then once you feel like you really got a firm handle, like if you're going to use music, double down on it, get really good at timing and when being the DJ, right? And queuing up the theme song for this character or whatever you're doing. Um, and if you get really good at that and you feel like, okay, I've got this down, then pick something else, right?
mm,
Now I want to work on my colorful descriptions. We'll start having conversations with ChatGPT or start reading a bunch of fantasy novels and brush up on your ability
yeah.
to describe, scenes, right? Or whatever it is, pick the one thing that you want to be really good at and practice it.
Mm. Yeah, descriptions. I've got a question in regards to descriptions. Do you think so? I use ChatGPT quite a lot for just like I'll have certain scenes that I really want to describe, and so I'll use ChatGPT in advance to kind of write myself some read aloud flavor text for those, the epic boss battle, or I want to discuss it like you enter this room and everything starts to animate and come alive, and so yeah, I will use stuff like ChatGPT. One thing I do is I use popular like things like movie scenes to describe stuff. Like and my players will go, oh, like in Pirates of the Caribbean or like in this, and I don't know if that is being immersive or am I taking players out of being immersive by making them think about something that's not in my game. I've kind of on a border there, like because they get what I'm describing because they already can relate it to something that's popular,
Right.
and they suddenly they're into it and they've bought the scene, and I've got them on board and we're all on the same page and we know exactly where we're at. For example, I was describing the gems in a statue and when they were investigating the room, he rolled a natural 20. So one of the triggers is if you take the gems out of the statue's eye, the room collapses. That's how it's written in the dungeon. Because he rolled a natural 20, I have to give him something. So I'm saying, hey, you get a feeling that this room is like the ceiling is triggered to collapse. So they were immediately, and then they were suddenly like, it's going to be like Indiana Jones, like this dungeon. If we pull these gems out, this whole place is coming down, and we're going to have a giant boulder running after us. And I was like, yeah. So and that's what I wanted. I want them to feel that, and I like that. But at the same time, are they being immersive in my world, or I don't know. Where do you stand on that?
That's a good question. And I would guess the best way to get that answer would be to ask your players, like, does that actually help you get immersed, or does it become a distraction? Because I feel like it's like any of the tools we just discussed. At a certain time they can be really helpful, but at other times they can become a distraction, right? Like D&D Beyond speeds up the game, but then it also means everybody at the table has a device in their face, right? It feels like maybe the theme we're stumbling upon here is all these different tools we use have advantages and disadvantages to them, and maybe that's kind of part of the process and kind of figuring out how you're going to add immersion to your table is figuring out which ones you are best at managing and being able to use them in the most advantageous way and minimize the disadvantages, if that makes sense.
Yep. Actually, that's fantastic. That is going to be my one piece of advice. Player feedback. regular input from your players to refine your immersion.
Yeah, because ultimately you might think you've done a great job describing things. And then, well, I mean, for example, just last night we were about to end on a cliffhanger, and I described this Grick climbing out of the wall and crawling up the player's leg. And so, I'm describing this creature. I'm not just saying it's a Grick. I'm describing the creature, and one of my players says, "Oh, like Demogorgon." It has like the mouth opens up, and so that was an example of what you're saying. Like they instantly related it to, something they were familiar with, and then I just showed them the picture, and that's when like half of the players were like, "Ooh, that's creepy," right?
Yeah.
So again, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So like one of the players seemed really bought in by my description. The other player was like, "Oh, like Demogorgon," and for him that resonated. And then I showed the picture, and the other two players were like, "Ooh, yeah, that's,"
Yeah.
So
see, I love that. Yeah, I love that. So yeah, like I did a fungi cabin, and as written, as they walk through the room, they have to make Constitution saving throws, and these like puffballs explode. But I did it like as you walk through the room, one of the mushrooms starts to like swell, like almost like an egg shape, like it's getting bigger, and they're like, "Oh, like an alien," and you're like, "Yes." Like that's what I want you to have, that emotion of watching that scene in that film where you're like going to where you're yelling at the screen going, "This is a bad place. Why are you there? Go. Why are you putting your face so close to it?" So yeah. I like it personally, and I think my players like it, and it saves me a lot of work when they get something and it clicks, and they're getting the same emotion as what you.
Yeah. I guess one final thought on all this and like the role of immersion is, maybe it's a good idea to not do the same thing all the time, right? Like you can use pictures sometimes, you can use colorful descriptions sometimes, you can use the example from another piece of pop culture, right? You can communicate in a lot of different ways. We were having a conversation a week or so ago on our podcast, Casual Fridays, and we were talking about the show Don't Tell, and the idea of sometimes it's actually better to tell instead of show, right? The advice is to always show, always use description, always, invite the players in with your words and your, colorful setting, right? As opposed to just saying there's a wizard in the room, describe a guy with a robe and a beard and a hat, and the players will figure out he's a wizard, right? But our discussion came around to the idea that sometimes it's better just to tell because it's faster and easier and quicker. And so I think it's a matter of pacing. Sometimes it's really good to show by like describing and trying to immerse the players. But other times when like you're trying to be like intense and set this tone of like, oh, we got to get this done fast. Sometimes it's better just to tell. And like, and then the wizard jumps out and does this, right? Because it's just quicker. So I think it's a balance, right? You can use all these different tools that we're talking about, but you're probably not going to use all of them at the same time. No. You can mix and match and kind of piece them together in a way that works for you and your table.
Yeah. No, you're definitely right. And yeah, like I could have spent ages just, drawing a map to this dungeon for this dragon sword that I want them to go find. But, just a couple of paragraphs of, you read this journal. There's a burial ground with a famous magic sword nearby. They would remember that,
right?
Because it's just 2 lines, and I know that will come back up. Whereas if I made a handout, I'm sure, unless like I'm going, hey, you've still got this handout, and I'm physically leaving it on the table like a hint. Like I know you've done, like you've said before. So sometimes, and if they don't take it, they don't take it. So maybe don't force it down their throat as well.
Right. Yeah. I think that ultimately there's so many different ways to approach it, and trying different ways and doing different things can they can all be effective.
I think another thing as well with description that we didn't mention, I just want to touch on is don't forget the senses. Describing sight, sound, smell. Something so simple is really easy to put in descriptions, like this place smells bad. Like I said, I have a thing. I have a gateway with oozes. I always emphasize whenever there's an ooze in the dungeon that this section of the dungeon is particularly clean for some reason, or
right? Yeah.
Someone's been here. So I think you see, and people. Yeah, so there can be so much work done by just describing how something smells or something sounds, or
just
saying.
I set up a scene there was a room full of mimics, and so I set it up in this like a rotten part of the dungeon where like it's kind of half flooded and the water's real like murky and smells terrible, right? Like that kind of rotten swamp smell as you're moving through these musty corridors. And then they get to a room and half the furniture in the room is like old and musty and decaying, but then the other half of the furniture is perfectly pristine. Looks brand new. And they're like, so is some of the furniture magic? Are they magic items? Is that why they haven't decayed? And now they're creeping in and they're going directly towards these pieces of furniture that are bright and shiny and look brand new, and those of course are the mimics.
Brilliant. And they'll soon learn. There's nothing like giving your players. My players have massive trust issues. It backfires sometimes because I'm like, this is a good guy. No, he's the baddie.
He's gonna double cross us. I know it.
Yeah. So, all right, mate. Well, thank you very much. That was a lot of fun. Is there anything you'd like to plug before we get out of here?
I mean, just my YouTube channel, Dire Den. Have videos up almost every Thursday, sometimes on Tuesday as well. Go check it out if you haven't subscribed already. Go see if you like it and if you want to watch more. And our group channel where I work with Ryan from Verdigrease Table and Jim from Wizards and Wordslingers. Landlocked Warlocks, where we do our Casual Friday podcast every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Those are kind of the two places you'll find me on YouTube.
Nice. Yeah, Casual Friday is a good time. I enjoy it. Breakfast time for me, so yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, mate. I enjoyed that.
Well, thank you for having me on. It was fun talking with you.
Cool. All right. Yeah, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review, feed that algorithm beast. I always suck at doing this side of this. Part of the whatever we do for a living, what we call this thing. Yep. But until next time, yeah, keep rolling those 20s.